Look at you writing like you're making notes. I know you're just working on your grocery list there. You know what it tastes like?
What's that?
Vindication. Oh, hi there. How you doing? I'm Brant Parsons. This is Matt Murschel. Welcome to College Football Now, as shown every day right here on OrlandoSentinel.com at 2 p.m. And just spending some time remembering back a week ago when I picked the Gators to beat Ole Miss and the various faces you were making as I was enjoying it.
Enjoy it now. You get to enjoy it while you can.
Let's talk about that. Florida Gators thump Ole Miss. Number 3 Ole Miss comes into Gainesville. They were down 25-0 at halftime. Will Greer had his obvious best game as a Florida Gator. 4 touchdowns all in the first half. 4 different receivers caught those touchdown passes. 24-29 passing, 279 yards. Ole Miss, they were held to just 300 yards. This was the number 1 offense in the country, held to 10 points. They turned the ball over 4 times. They were sacked 4 times. UF scored 19 points off of turnovers. This was the best game Florida has played in a long time. I joked, I said it was the best game they played since Tim Tebow cried on the sideline. But it's been a long time since Florida looked this good.
Yeah, it really has been. I think part of that was this was the most complete game this Florida team has played, probably in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, honestly. For every aspect of the Gators program looked good here. We saw it from the quarterback play. We saw it at running backs, offensive line, defensive line, special teams. Everything was just in sync. And I think one of the things that really helped us in this game was they took advantage of a really kind of aggressive defensive stance. They got to Chad Kelly early on. Ole Miss got out of sync, really couldn't execute very well. Once Florida got up score-wise, really then the fan base really got energized. I think that's probably the loudest the Swamp has been, easily in 3 or 4 years. Again, once they kind of built that lead, they were able to continue to put to Florida, but they just didn't execute well. Again, they came into this game expecting to win, but it really never happened. And, Florida continued to move forward. So after the game, Chad Kelly said, all props to, Florida, but they just didn't execute well. Again, they came into this game expecting to win, but it really never happened. And, Florida was the complete game. That's something that I think Jim McElwain's been looking for. If Florida plays if they play like this every game from now on, this is a scary team. And this is a team that could compete for the college football playoff.
All joking aside, I did pick Florida to win. People did think I was crazy. People around the office thought I was crazy. And the reason I thought Florida could win this game was because of the defense, because the defense matched up well against the Ole Miss offense, and it showed. You're looking at a guy like Antonio Morrison had a huge day. The secondary had a huge day shutting Chad Kelly down. When you look at how Florida matches up, maybe they don't match up well later on against like an LSU, but against Ole Miss, they were set up perfectly for this.
Yeah, and you talked about with the defensive line, Florida's defense. They're second in the SEC with 18 sacks right now. Again, being aggressive, I think that's something that they need to do defensively. They need to keep going after quarterbacks. They need to disrupt the offensive flow of teams. I think if they continue to do that, they've got a great secondary. We need that going into the season. That Vernon Hargraves and those guys up front really be aggressive and go after the quarterback. We've seen that so far. I think one of the things I want to see, it was a great performance by Will Greer. We need to see the offense continue to move forward. We need to see Will Greer continue to develop in what he's been able to do so far. Had no interceptions. That was a big key. No turnovers. They need to continue to do that. It's going to be tough this week, and it's going to be tough moving forward. But if they can do that, I think Florida's got a good chance this year.
Before we move on, just a few housekeeping issues. I'd like to apologize to our viewers for seeing us in HD now. The camera, we can make the picture better. We can't fix this. This is genetics. But we are being broadcast in HD live for the first time.
Good thing we have a makeup lady.
We're pretty excited about that. We do need to talk. So now we need a house band. We still need a craft services table. And now
we need a makeup lady.
We need makeup.
So there you go.
To be able to put this in HD and make it bearable for you guys. Other housekeeping note, you will occasionally hear construction in the background. That's just the UCF football team. They're here making a couple extra bucks trying to rebuild. Speaking of UCF, you like that segue? That's a professional segue right there. Right there. ESPN, give me a call. UCF struggled again this weekend. Of course, they went to Lane, and the scores finished at 45-31. It wasn't that close. I mean, this was Tulane knocked UCF around a lot early in this one. UCF outscored them in the fourth quarter, 21-7, to get back into that game. But just a couple notes here before we talk about negative 35 yards rushing for UCF in this game. They were forced to pass the ball because they were down and ended up with almost 400 yards passing. Tyler Harris came in, actually did pretty well in mop-up duty with 156 yards and 3 touchdowns. 4 turnovers for UCF, 3 INTs, 1 fumble in that one. We've been talking about UCF and their struggles this year. This was one of the games we looked at and thought, well, this might be one that they can win. There's not many, looking at this UCF team right now with its youth, with its injuries, that we thought could win a game this year. This was one of them, and it was bad from the start.
Yeah, it really was. And, again, we talked about, you mentioned the injuries, you mentioned the inexperience, the youth factor in this UCF team. I think, obviously, that's one of the things that we're seeing a lot this year. Again, a lot of guys are going to have to step up and make plays. I think George O'Leary has done a relatively good job of addressing that, saying that, we got guys who need to really step up and make the plays, earn the scholarship, so to speak. That's something I think needs to happen. And I mean, again, I think if they get Justin Holman, the quarterback, back maybe this week or next, I think that'll help some things as well. But not having a running game has really hampered this offense. They haven't been able to kind of establish any sort of tempo. They haven't been able to really control the clock. And that's something I think people kind of overlook. But if you can control the clock, if you can keep your offense on the field for 3, 4, 5-minute drives, that just rests your defense. That rests some of those young guys. Because believe me, when you go on your 3 and out, 4 and out, or whatever it is, the defensive guys have to play a lot longer. That kind of wears these guys out, especially if you're already thin in some positions. So we're seeing that right now. I mean, what can you say? You just look at the schedule and you just hope that maybe guys get healthy. You put some of these young guys who are getting opportunities to play, in the last couple of weeks. That'll help them up down the road when they're really going to need them. So hopefully you just keep moving with the best foot forward and you look at the schedule. This week you got a showdown with UConn. You kind of focus on that game and you keep moving forward.
Talk about time of possession. Let's move on to Florida State, Wake Forest, and nice job by the guys in the back because I skipped around on here because I really wanted that UCF segue. But Florida State against Wake Forest, they just win, baby, 24-16. And you talk about time of possession. Wake Forest had the ball in this game for almost 36 minutes. They held the ball in the fourth quarter for 11 minutes. Florida State just could not sustain a drive in the fourth quarter. They struggled in the running game when Dalvin Cook left. Everett Golson was serviceable, 202 yards passing, a touchdown in this game. But this was another case of Florida State's offense still trying to figure things out. No turnovers still, no offensive turnovers for Florida State. What they've wanted from Everett Golson, this is one of those games you're happy that you got the W, but they certainly let Wake Forest stay around way too long in this one.
Well, you look at this Florida State team, and you're just not quite sure who they are. I mean, what is the identity of the Seminoles? I mean, we're used to the last couple of years of being a brash offense that goes out and makes big plays and puts up a lot of points. The defense that comes in and kind of shuts teams down. Excuse me. We haven't been able to see that so far with Florida State. No, that's okay. I don't drink that stuff. We haven't been able to see that so far from Florida State. And I think that's something that I'm interested in seeing. I want to know what this Florida State team can do when they really get tested. I think Everett Golson is getting better, as Jimbo Fisher has alluded to. I think you're seeing him kind of get more comfortable back in the pocket in this offense. But again, Florida State needs to, in my estimation, needs to push the ball downfield more. They need to do a better job of creating that separation, because I think what's happening is, Dalvin Cook's having a great year, but he's injured, and now you've got some young guys coming in. They're going to need opportunities. They're going to need to be able to run the ball. I think if you go deep a couple times, you kind of open things up, in the middle of the defense, I think those running backs will have opportunities to do that. Plus, with a young offensive line, you need to give those guys some opportunities to kind of get those big plays. So far, it's worked out well for Florida State, but again, they're going to have some struggles down the road, I think.
I mean, it starts this week with Miami. Brendan Sonone and I do a weekly podcast where we talk bi-weekly podcasts, so shameless plug there, on FSU. And every week we've discussed this Florida State offense and how they're searching for answers and trying to find his identity. And this week, we just came up with the idea that maybe this is the Florida State offense. Maybe this is what you're going to get from them. You're going to get a serviceable Everett Golson who doesn't make mistakes but doesn't stretch the field. You're going to get an offensive line that continues the gel but is young. And hopefully you have a healthy Dalvin Cook, because when you don't have Dalvin Cook running the ball, then you're struggling to move it that way, as they did against Wake Forest with Mario Pender already out. Jonathan Vickers filled in relatively well at times, and other times showed his youth. And Jaquez Patrick also got into some action but didn't run the ball. But maybe this is Florida State's offense. Maybe this is what they're going to have this year, and we keep waiting for the light to switch on. Maybe it's not going to switch on, and this is what they're going to be playing with this year.
Well, and that's fine. Again, as long as you win, as you mentioned earlier, the joke, win, baby. I mean, as long as they win, I think that's not going to be a problem. But when you look at this team and you look at Clemson, for instance, in the ACC, I think you look at that Clemson team, you think, well, I think they're obviously a little bit better right now, playing at a better level than Florida State's playing right now, despite the fact that Florida State's undefeated. So again, I think Florida State is going to be tested down the road. You talked about it this weekend against Miami. I think this is one of those games. I think normally you're used to seeing this being a blowout on one end. I think this will be a lot closer too.
Talk about Miami playing Florida State this week. Last week on Thursday night, they went up to Cincinnati and lost to the American Conference team 34-23 in that one. Cincy outscored Miami 17-3 after the Canes took a 20-17 lead in the second quarter. Cincinnati, 446 total yards. This is Miami defense, not the Miami defenses of old. Brad Kaya had 255 yards. Joe Yerby ran for 113 yards. But the two main things to take out of this one heading into the Florida State game, one, this defense really has trouble against these fast-paced offenses, which they won't have to worry about as much with Florida State. And the heat is growing on Al Golden. And this is a topic that resonates with me growing up in Miami and my friends that are Miami fans who still think that he's going to be fired, and I don't believe so, because Miami they don't have firing money for this. But how real is this heat on Al Golden after this loss?
Well, I think it's very real. I mean, I think, again, there was dissatisfaction with Al Golden's performance going into the season. So, they start out 3-0 and they start out impressive. And I think even then they're flying banners across your, to have you fired. I mean, what does that tell you about how they just don't like you as a coach and what you've been able to do so far? It's a big loss, obviously. You're losing to a non-conference opponent, losing to someone outside of a Power 5 conference as well. That's got to hurt too. And I think one of the struggles has also been, you look at a team that doesn't do very well on third downs. Miami's one of the worst when it comes to that in the ACC. Brad Kaya, who is a tremendous quarterback, very young quarterback, struggles on third downs, struggles to get those completions. I think when you put them in third and long, I think those are bad situations as well. And those are going to be struggles they're going to have this weekend against Florida State. You think it's bad this past week after Cincinnati, they lose to Florida State this week, then you'll really start feeling it. But I'm with you. I don't necessarily think you fire Al Golden. I mean, again, do you have that kind of money? I mean, we're talking a big pot of money. His contract goes through 2019. So you're looking at $2.5 million a year to 2019. What is that? I mean, that breaks down to $8-9 million. I don't think Miami has that kind of money to fire him. So either you hope something else opens up and he decides to leave the program, which I don't think happens, or you put up with what he's been able to do. And listen, the 2016 and 2017 recruiting classes, Miami's like top 15 in both of those. So you've got lots of talent keep coming in. I know we keep saying that every year, but again, it's kind of hard. If you fire a guy, then you're basically saying, let's scrap the program for the next 3 or 4 years, and you're going to lose a lot of those recruits.
And Miami fans, I think we've discussed this on air, off air, all summer. I think they have a misidea of what they can even get in place of an Al Golden. Luther Campbell tweeting out his wish list with a lot of misspellings. But
I like Dana Hologram. That was a good one to me. I think if you get if they feel that a hologram could coach better than Al Golden, what does that tell you?
Gary Peterson and Butch Davis. I mean, there's just kind of a chasm between Miami fans and what they really are. And Miami, they don't have Texas firing money. If Texas wants to fire Charlie Strong, they'll find someone. Yeah. They'll find a couple of donors that'll easily write the check. Miami just doesn't have the money. Nothing against Miami. They don't have firing money for Al Golden right now because they have him locked in so long. So instead of attacking him, you're going to have to get used to it. Let's see what he can do with the guys he's bringing in, which as you said, he's got some good recruiting classes lined up.
Well, and I think also, too, I always say this when it comes to firing coaches. If you fire a head coach, it's not as if the next year, things are going to be good. It's a very rarity. You can look at Michigan and say, well, look what they did with Jim Harbaugh. Look what they're doing. Look what Jim McElwain at Florida. Yeah, but those are very rare. And again, this school spent lots of money to get those guys. Think about this. Florida spent close to $10 million to get Jim McElwain to come coach at Florida by the time they got done paying off Colorado State.
Well, if you add in how much they're paying to Muschamp,
exactly, and
$20-some million deal.
Jim Harbaugh, same thing. You're paying a lot of money to bring those kind of guys in. You're not going to do that if you're mine, because if you got to pay $6 to $8, $10 million to get rid of Al Golden and his staff, again, you're probably going to more likely get rid of staff. That's more money. You're going to then hire another coach. That's a lot of money to put out right away, and I don't think you're going to be able to do that. Plus, the next guy you bring in isn't probably going to be a big name hire. You're going to have to bring in somebody who the top priority is recruits the state of Florida really well and recruits Miami really well, because that's the secret. If you get those players there, there's tons of talent there. You get those players to stay there, not go outside to the Big 12, to the SEC, to the and elsewhere. You keep them there. I think that's where you'll find success. Al Golden's doing that right now. I think you're just going to have to give him a couple more years and see what happens.
Miami fans can handle that. It'll be fun to watch the banners this weekend, at least. Just a couple of notes from over the weekend and see which one sticks out most to you. Clemson holds off Notre Dame in the rain. Ohio State, Michigan State pull off narrow wins against opponents that shouldn't have been that close. You have Arizona State shocking UCLA out in the Pac-12, and you also have big winners Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Stanford. From this past weekend outside the state, what kind of things kind of stood out to you?
Well, I think the thing that really stood out to me was, once again, that we haven't seen a dominant number one team. We haven't seen a team step forward and say, I'm the best team in the country. Ohio State's ranked number one, sure, and they've been number one since the preseason, but they haven't looked like the number one team. And all Urban Meyer does is he continues to win. And I think that's going to keep the Buckeyes at number one unless something really comes out. Someone steps forward. He's lucky that no one else has stepped forward, because if a TCU or a Baylor or a Michigan State were playing at a higher level, I think you wouldn't see Ohio State being ranked number one. I think they would fall a little bit. But TCU is struggling a little bit. They're putting up a lot of points, but again, inferior competition. Baylor's the same sort of scenario. Michigan State has its problems, barely getting by Purdue. I mean, you're looking at teams now like Clemson. You go down the list, to some other teams and think USC. And even now we're starting to see the one-loss teams kind of starting to make their way up. Alabama with one loss is climbing the ladder. So Stanford with one loss is climbing the ladder. So I think you're seeing some of these other teams move forward. So no one has stepped forward to me and said, I'm the best team in the country. And I think if we won't see that happen, actually, maybe for at least another month or so, which will make the new college football playoff, the selection committee's job, its second year, really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's why Ohio State is still number one, just because there's nobody that's proven to be better. They're the defending champs, and they're there by default. I felt after
but I disagree with that. I will say this. I know they're number one by default, but I think that's a bad precedent to set. It's just that you're number one just by default, because
that's how the polls work.
And that's why the polls don't matter until you get down to the final October. But I'm saying, I understand why it's that way, but I think to me that's not a good answer, because to be honest with you, if you're just going to take the teams, take away the names, strip away the coachings, and just say this is what they've done on the field, who would be ranked number one? That's what the playoff selection committee is supposed to do, and probably will do. So it'll be interesting to see how they do it. But I agree in the sense that, yes, that's why they're ranked number one.
And I felt after the Ohio State game, I told people if Ole Miss would have beat Florida, they would have been number one this week.
Yes.
Because people are just looking for a reason, not necessarily, but Ohio State deservedly has not played well. And if there's a team that is willing to step into that vacuum and play well, and Ole Miss at number 3 with a win over Bama, if they would have gone in and beat Florida, who was a top 25 team at the time, I think they could have overtaken Ohio State. It wasn't going to be Michigan State, because Michigan State dropped 2. But for now, Ohio State is 1, and for now, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Your column this week, I found it interesting, and it was looking at the teams, which we've kind of talked about a little bit before, but more in depth, teams that you're looking at now as having a chance to be part of the playoff. Not the Ohio States, not the Baylors, the TCUs, but some of these other teams, some surprises, some maybe not. And the first one, obviously, a huge surprise at this point for people, and that would be Utah. The Utes come into this week number 5 in the AP poll, number 7 in the coaches poll. They have a win over Oregon, the biggest win at Oregon for an opponent since 1977. Oregon's play kind of takes some of the luster off that, but this is a good Utah team. and their schedule is going to start picking up in this. But you see them as being a player in this now.
Yeah, I do. Well, especially this weekend. They now face an undefeated Cal team that's ranked top 25. So if they were to beat, a Cal team, and again, as we mentioned, the teams above them struggle, I think you'll see Utah climb their way back in there. This is the best team we've seen out of them since the 2008 team when they went 13-0 and went to the Sugar Bowl and beat Alabama. So I think really Kyle Whittingham's done a great job with this program right now. They come back, they got great running back and Devontae Booker. You look at their play from quarterback, Travis Wilson has stepped up and made some plays. Their defense is doing it. Special teams, they're a complete team right now. And I think as long as they continue to play that way, and the Pac-12 still, to me, is up in chaos now. I mean, you take Utah, but then you look at Cal, being ranked. You look at what UCLA is, what USC is, what Stanford is. I think those programs are all kind of just battling it out right now. But Utah right now is playing some of the best football we've seen.
Pac-12 likely will have a one-loss team win it.
Yeah.
And that one-loss team may be in the playoff because the Pac-12 is full of good teams. It's a tough schedule. It's much like the SEC. You aren't going to penalize a team necessarily for a loss. Utah doesn't even have one of those yet, but you're not going to necessarily penalize a Pac-12 team. Because
and what helps them, too, is their schedule. They beat a Michigan team at the time everyone thought was just, kind of a so-so Michigan team. Now Michigan's ranked high, climbing up the rankings. So that helps them. As long as Michigan continues to win, that'll help Utah as long as they remain undefeated.
We've talked often about ACC maybe not being able to fill a playoff spot, but this past weekend a team put its name in the basket, and that's Clemson with a big win over Notre Dame at home. The schedule picks up a little bit for them, and they have Georgia Tech this weekend. Of course, that November 7th date with Florida State still looms. They get to play the Noles at home, but Clemson, we had concerns about their defense heading into the year because of the turnover and Deshaun Watson's health, but they came through against Notre Dame, and now they are starting to look like a playoff team. And if for no other reason, I want to see Dabo Swinney just lose it during a post-game interview, win or loss, because he's a lot of fun. But Clemson now has played itself into the discussion.
Yeah, they have. Last year when Dabo Swinney and Clemson were here in Orlando, I spoke with Swinney and I asked him, and he kind of said, I feel like this is a team that should be next year among the discussion for the college football playoff. And we kind of laughed about it. I mean, the reporters laughed. We laughed. He did laugh. But again, I think you're looking at this team, and I think they've got the pieces to get there. They've got a defense right now that's playing really well. I think Deshaun Watson slowly is getting back to where he is. He's not where he was, last year before he got hurt. He's still struggling a little bit throwing the ball. He's still having, doesn't have that comfortability to get out of the pocket and run when he needs those options. And like I said, when you look at Clemson, I mean, they're playing really good football right now. Now, again, if they have a big schedule, if something were to happen, if they were to lose this week, if they were to lose, again, then we throw that all up in the air. But if they continue to play the way they're playing, they get to that Florida State game, that's only going to help them long term down the road.
And we know an SEC team's likely going to be in a playoff, and a team that has itself set up well right now is LSU. Heisman frontrunner Leonard Fournette, just a few numbers. He's leading the country in 864 yards rushing yards per game, 216 points per game, 16.5. The LSU offense kind of starts and stops with him, but their defense is also pretty good down there with Les Miles. LSU certainly not a shock to be in the mix. Maybe some thought they were a year away in some areas, but this LSU team playing like a team that deserves to be in the discussion, and obviously they are because we're talking about them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that helps LSU is really, people think maybe having a Heisman guy like Leonard Fournette would distract, but I think it's the opposite. I think it's really they're kind of hyped on this. I think they really feel good about it. The one thing I'm hesitant about with LSU is their quarterback play has been atrocious. I mean, Brendan Harris really hasn't been forced to have to throw the ball a lot, to lead this team. At some point, some team is going to stack the box against Leonard Fournette, throw 8 guys up there, and make them throw the ball to beat them. And I think that game could be next week against Florida. I mean, I think the Gators are the perfect team really set up to beat this LSU team, if you think about it, because they have an aggressive front line defensively. And I think, again, what Les Miles has done, like a lot of good coaches, is he's recruited well, restocks, despite the fact you had tons of kids go to the NFL, tons of juniors go to the NFL. They're coming off an 8-win season. You wouldn't think this would be the year, but they're playing really well. If they get past Florida, I think they've got a good shot.
The other team that has a chance to shut down Leonard Fournette and is built to beat LSU, Alabama. And this is a team people couldn't wait to bury after the Ole Miss loss. And the columnists are already writing a narrative of the end of the Saban dynasty, and all they did was go out and just absolutely embarrass Georgia between the hedges on Saturday in the rain. And obviously impress the voters because Alabama jumped to number 8 in the polls ahead of Ole Miss, the team that beat them. which is always fun to see how that happens. But Alabama, I've said all along that I thought that they were still the team to beat in the SEC. I felt like they were still going to win the SEC. They're back in this. It's still not completely in their hands because they need Ole Miss to have another loss. But Alabama certainly played against Georgia like the Alabama we expected. And Derrick Henry, as long as Nick Saban remembers he has him, he's a beast, and he needs to touch the ball often.
Well, Nick Saban this week went after the media, took umbrage with the media
Yes.
for writing the fact that, that this dynasty was buried, done and gone.
But then he said he doesn't read any of that stuff.
But then he said he doesn't read that. But I'm going to put this out right now. I can almost guarantee that Nick Saban, as soon as those stories were written, smiled, took them up, pasted them up in the locker room, because he knows that's good fodder to get this team really fired up. And I'm sure they used that against Georgia. Here they're coming in, we're underdogs. They think, we're done and gone. You use that to build up team. He's a good, smart coach. He knows how that stuff works. We know that good on. So again, I don't necessarily think that Alabama was done to begin with. I think how they won that game was typical Alabama football. Don't turn the ball over if you can help it. Have a strong up front, defensive line. They were able to really kind of cause havoc. Grayson Lambert, the Georgia quarterback, didn't look very comfortable at all the whole game. Didn't look like the guy we saw coming into this, the first 4 games coming into this game. And like you mentioned, Derrick Henry ran the ball really well. They just kind of played old-fashioned Alabama football. And one of the things that really impressed me was Jake Coker. He struggled, early on. People wondered if he was really the guy that should be leading this Alabama offense. Didn't have any turnovers, managed the clock well. Again, was able to take advantage of some of the mistakes that Georgia made.
Yeah, and Alabama, if you look at their schedule, they don't face a team like Ole Miss offense the rest of the year. The offense is in the
Texas
West.
A&M will be the closest.
Texas A&M will
be the closest.
But
again, and that's probably going to be their biggest challenge outside, moving forward.
Right. So it favors them, I feel, looking the rest of the way now that they've bounced back. A team I've been touting for the Big 12 championship all season long. Got a big win against West Virginia. That, of course, the Oklahoma Sooners. They're likely to go through October undefeated. Their meat of the schedule is at the end. They finish up in November at Baylor, against TCU, and at Oklahoma State. They're going to be players in this game. They're going to be undefeated in my estimation, because they're going to go against some of the bottom feeders of the Big 12. But this is going to be an Oklahoma team that is going to have the chance to knock off both TCU and Baylor on consecutive weeks. And I think they have the talent to do it right now.
Yeah, I think they're playing some really good football. This is another case. We talk about teams that kind of surprise us a little bit. Oklahoma comes off a really bad bowl loss last year to Clemson. Bob Stoops really evaluates what he wants to do with this program, makes wholesale changes, through the coaching staff. Brings in a guy like Lincoln Riley, the East Carolina offensive coordinator, tells them, let's up tempo, let's get this offense going. We want to get exciting again. And we've seen that. We've seen Baker Mayfield has really kind of blossomed under Riley as the offensive coordinator, has done a tremendous job. This defense is getting better week by week. They need to get better week by week, because early on they were giving up a lot of points and a lot of yards. Because eventually, like you mentioned, they're going to face offenses like TCU and Baylor and even Oklahoma State, and they got to shut these teams down. I think they have the offense to score the points. Now they just got to be able to focus on, like we mentioned, the defense.
As Notre Dame failed to force that game against Clemson in overtime, I'm sure there are fighting Irish people, probably in your family, fans that were talking about the demise and a loss of their chance. But Notre Dame, with that one loss, with their schedule, they still get to play USC, have to play USC and Stanford. Can't count them out with just one loss at this point.
No, you can't. But like a lot of these teams, you got to hope that USC and Stanford continue to do well, because as long as they continue to climb up the rankings, I think that helps Notre Dame's case. Because again, they got Navy this week, an undefeated Navy team. So if they beat Navy, move forward, I think they've got the schedule to do it. If they go through and do everything they need to do, a one-loss Notre Dame team, depending on what happens around them, can easily get the top 4. Because again, as much as they're not supposed to be based on this, there is some brand recognition with Notre Dame, and there's some. I think that will be a big draw for the college football playoff.
I'm sure you have families that feel better when you tell them, "Hey, Notre Dame's still in my mix. I'm still looking at him for the playoff."
We'll see by Christmas time if I get any Christmas cards from anyone in my family.
One of the games you talked about with Notre Dame, USC. This is a team again with one loss in the Pac-12 already. That isn't out of it at this point, and they're going to have plenty of chances still to prove it with Notre Dame, Utah, Cal, UCLA on the schedule. USC, when they look good, they're good. With that one slip up to their nemesis Stanford. But this is a team, if they play out well, they could be in the mix.
Yeah, and I think what's going to, again, because of the Pac-12 championship game, if they win the Pac-12 South, USC then will probably more likely play either Stanford or Cal, unless somehow Oregon, can find its way back into the mix, which I don't think is going to happen. So that helps them a little bit. But again, they're like Utah. They need these other teams to kind of keep doing well in the Pac-12, because when they stumble, it really makes the Pac-12 as a conference kind of fall back a little bit. Having that Notre Dame game was definitely going to help them a little. That'll give them a boost as well. Again, this team, Cody Kessler, I think, is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Really hasn't had a bad game so far this season. Even in the loss to Stanford, he wasn't really that bad. So I look for him to have a big, strong performance. The defense could do its job. I think USC could be in the mix easily when it get down to late November.
And one other SEC team that you had in the mix, and this is a team that's off to its best start since it's been in the SEC, best start in decades. That's Texas A&M. And it gets real for them. They have a bye week this week, but then they play Alabama, then they visit Ole Miss, and then they finish the season at the end of November at LSU. So they're going to have chances to prove themselves and not prove themselves. And you guys had the wrong Texas there. We're talking about Texas A&M, so just wanted people to realize that.
Texas is going to be.
Texas is not going to be in the playoff. The only playoff Texas is going to be in is going to be a very bad one. But Texas A&M, this is a team you've been more bullish on than I have. It's taken me a while to come around on them, but big win against Mississippi State, and they're showing to be a more complete team than we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, I think what's helped them is John Chavis. I think defensive coordinator has done an amazing job. I think we knew Texas A&M always had the offense. And Kevin Sumlin always does an amazing job developing quarterbacks, and we've seen that now with Kyle Allen as well. Offensively, they score points. We know that. But defensively, they've always given up lots of yards and lots of big plays. I think John Chavis has done a better job as a defensive coordinator doing that. They got a tremendous young guy in Myles Garrett on their defensive line. He's second, I think, in the country in sacks. So he's a guy that's really done a good job of creating pressure as well. So I think that's helped Texas A&M. But I also say this. Texas A&M started 5-0 last year and then proceeded to lose a good chunk of its games after that. So, again, which is kind of one of those caveat things where let's see if they can do better. I don't think that's going to happen this year. But, again, as you mentioned, their schedule, that Alabama game really is going to be the make or break one for them.
I mean, you threw a bunch of teams into your hat here, and one team that you threw in, which, listen, I picked them to beat Ole Miss. I've been walking around, with the I'll beat Gator head on, but I don't know about the Florida Gators being in the playoff. Yeah, I know we're just speculating at this point, but I want to know how this team jumped out of the poll to number 11 in just 2 weeks with a come-from-behind win over Tennessee and obviously the win over number 3 Ole Miss. They look great, but are we really ready to talk about Florida as a potential playoff team?
Well, I still think it's early on. I threw them at the very end because I wanted to bring this up that, you look at what Florida has on their schedule, right? If they go to Missouri and win this week, they play LSU next week, highly ranked LSU team. Let's say, as I mentioned before, I think they're the perfect setup team to beat LSU. So you beat LSU, you get that win. That's another huge win. That pushes you up the rankings as well. And then you look at that Georgia game. That Georgia game in Jacksonville all of a sudden becomes the huge game, probably for the SEC East title right now. So that gets you a big push as well. Then you move forward and you play Florida State. Florida State is undefeated. They're going to be highly ranked. If you were to beat them, you're firmly in that. My guess is you're firmly in the top 4 spots. Then you play the SEC championship game, which again could be against, who knows, maybe it be Ole Miss, it could be Alabama, it could be whatever. Let's say it's Alabama who's highly ranked again. Then all of a sudden, that's 5 or 6 high-ranked teams right there. I think if you somehow win those games, you are right there in the mix for the college football playoff. That's a big if, like I said. So I think we'll see what happens, but I think, again, they're a team you have to consider. They're playing really well right now, and if they continue to play that way, I think you can find them in there.
I'm telling you, you really need to start drinking the Gatorade because you sound like
I can't drink that.
You sound like you're drinking the Gatorade.
Do they make Johnny Walker Gatorade, or no? I guess not. So.
I'll be doing Gainesville. Before we move on to our picks this week, a look at the Heisman Watch every week. My friend and colleague Matt Murschel looks at the Heisman race, and he added 2 names this week. He added Cal quarterback Jared Goff to the mix, but the guy that we're going to talk about is Ezekiel Elliott, running back for Ohio State, who saved Ohio State's season so far on Saturday against Indiana. He had a career day, 270-some yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, 3 long touchdown runs. Just give the ball to Zeke. If you're Ohio State, that's what you have to be thinking. Just give the ball to Zeke. He got himself back into he was in the Heisman talk. Kind of disappeared from it, but you have him back in the Heisman talk again.
Yeah, he was quietly, kind of. It wasn't like he just all of a sudden burst on last week. I mean, he's had rushed for last week was his 5th game with 100 or more rushing yards. He had over 270, I think, against Indiana. Really, like you mentioned, carried them to the win. If he doesn't have that performance, I think Ohio State loses that game. To be frank with you, he's been strong so far. I think one of the problems with Ohio State's offense is, again, kind of a little bit like Florida State. They don't really know what their identity is. Is it going to be Cardell Jones? Is it going to be Ezekiel Elliott? Is it going to be a mix? They need to get that kind of fine balance that we've seen. I think if Elliott continues to have that push and remains strong, I think he'll be that carries them forward and keeps them undefeated and keeps them ranked top 25. Again, I had 3 running backs in my Heisman watch this week. I had Fournette, Elliott, and Nick Chubb of Georgia. This is going to be the year, I think, that we could see a running back win the Heisman Trophy. There's no, outside of Trayvon Boykin and Jared Goff and maybe throwing a Baker Mayfield and a Cody Kessler, there hasn't been a strong quarterback play so far. So we need to see these guys push forward. If Fournette rushes for 200 yards again this week against South Carolina, I think he really kind of distanced himself almost to the point where if he does the same thing against Florida, I think it's going to be unstoppable for him not to get it.
You ready to make some picks?
Let's make some picks. Let's do it this week.
Let's start around the country first. Number 10, Oklahoma against Texas in their annual game in Dallas. 87th straight time that they've played in Dallas, 110th meeting about it. And really the only reason we're making a pick on Oklahoma, Texas is to talk about Charlie Strong and the future there. Longhorns are 1-4 this year. One thing to point out about the 4 losses that Texas has are the teams that are 19-1 on the season. So while they're not playing well, and you have the embarrassing finish against Cal, and the various ways they've lost have been ugly, but this is not a Texas team losing to lower tiered people. But now they get Oklahoma, another undefeated team. Mm-hmm. What kind of future are we looking at here for Charlie Strong down in Austin?
Well, it depends on who you talk with. I think a lot of people want to see him gone. I don't necessarily know if you do that. I mean, listen, the only thing that concerns me about the situation with Texas is when you have your locker room divided, when you have players tweeting at each other, sniping at each other about, come talk to me, come talk to that, like we saw this week when it comes to being called out. That to me concerns me because you want to see your locker room being united. If they're united behind your coach and what your coaching staff and what you're doing, then I think you could say, okay, fine. But when they start breaking apart and you see that divide in the locker room, that's a bad sign. But again, we talked about this with Al Golden. Texas has the money to buy out Charlie Strong. It's like $10 million, I think, when you're looking at the big situation now, it would be get down to it. But I think if I'm Texas right now, you look at the schedule, you look at who they're facing right now, you just want to see development. Now, if you get past this year, your third year is usually the year you really want to see some things happen. If it doesn't happen now, I think you can make some changes. I think if they make any changes, it's going to be after the end of the season. I think it's on the coaching staff itself. I think they may make some moves, maybe get rid of some coordinators, decide to move some things around. Because, again, this team has had its struggles offensively. We've seen that. They've had a struggle to develop a quarterback. Again, Charlie Strong's still a good recruiter. He really hasn't had his guys had a chance to really get in and make some moves. So I think Strong survives another year, but I think next year he definitely is going to be on the hot seat and needs a good, strong performance.
The one thing against him, there are people in Texas, some boosters, that were never really thrilled about the hiring in the first place. College football minds, we love the hiring. We thought we thought Strong, what he did at Louisville was strong. And we thought he was good at Florida, and he was an up-and-coming assistant there. So, but there were people in the Texas money that were never really thrilled about this hiring to begin with.
And there was always the Nick Saban.
They wanted the Saban.
They wanted Nick Saban to come in and turn this program around and happen. Listen, the thing that hurts Charlie Strong's case, as I mentioned this before, is Jim Harbaugh at Michigan and Jim McElwain at Florida. When a guy comes in and turns a program around in the first year, essentially, when you see winning and winning and winning, that's when all of a sudden the fan bases get angry. And Texas fans aren't used to that. And one of the things that hurts too as well is Texas is such a football crazy state that they know that, as they're watching programs like TCU, Baylor, Texas A&M, SMU, Houston, programs that are starting to get rebound quickly and getting higher ranked up, they're seeing Texas kind of remain at the bottom. They know they're losing the recruiting battles, and they're going to lose those recruiting battles to Texas. And if that happens for the Longhorns, that's when you really see the push on whether or not Charlie Strong is the right guy. But again, if you fire Charlie Strong, who do you bring in? What name is out there that you see besides Nick Saban? And I don't think Nick Saban's going to make that move. So I think, again, it's looking around, finding out the best fit for Texas right now. I think that happens to be Charlie Strong.
Yeah, we're both taking Oklahoma in that game just for posterity reasons. Georgia Tech visits number 6 Clemson, 3:30 game on ABC and ESPN2 mirrored on Saturday. Georgia Tech has beat Clemson more than any other school in Tech's history. Thought that was kind of interesting. But these teams have played in the ACC the last 6 times. The home team has won the game, so you would think that puts the favoritism and even more so on Clemson coming off their big win. The only game, though, that Clemson has not won that Deshaun Watson started was last year against Tech, and that was the game that he got injured in. Can Clemson, a week off of Notre Dame, and I'm tipping my pick here, come down from that game, not get stuck in a trap, and be able to figure out that Georgia Tech offense?
Yeah, I think they will. Georgia Tech has struggled. This isn't a Georgia Tech team. This is another team. We talk about the ACC and its struggles of finding identity within some of its teams. I think Georgia Tech is a perfect example of that. They come out strong. They're ranked high. They have a good performance. Then they lose. And all of a sudden now they've lost 2 in a row. They lose to Notre Dame, and they lost last week as well. Now you get into this situation where you're facing a Clemson team. You're really just hanging on for dear life to try to be any sort of factor in the ACC Coastal. So, I think Clemson right now defensively is playing well enough to win this game. I think if Deshaun Watson stays healthy and it continues to kind of grow like we've seen the last couple of weeks, I like Clemson in this game. But I'm also saying that this is one of those games that, as you mentioned, you're coming off a big emotional win against Notre Dame. It's also an opportunity for a letdown. But I like Clemson. I think Clemson wins, but it's going to be close.
I'm taking Georgia Tech in this game because of the letdown, and also because I think it's tough to prepare for Georgia Tech in a week. It's probably even harder to prepare for them coming off the big win and getting these kids' heads to maybe come down a little bit in this one. I think Georgia Tech goes into Clemson, stuns the Tigers on Saturday afternoon. Number 2, TCU heads to Manhattan, Kansas, to face Kansas State. TCU, a 13-game winning streak. That's the second longest in the country behind Ohio State's. Josh Doxson, he doesn't get a lot of talk compared to his quarterback. He leads, he's second in the country, 722 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns. The thing in this one, Kansas State, they've played 4 different quarterbacks this season, and a wide receiver has played quarterback. They have been struggling to deal with injuries across the ranks in quarterback. Is this just another notch on TCU's romp to where they play the big games against Baylor and Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think it is. Again, if Kansas State maybe had some consistency, but when you've got 4 or 5 different guys playing quarterback, it's hard to get your offense to do the things you want to do. You're kind of limited to what you're looking at. I think TCU is playing better. I think as long as their defense, starts to play a little bit better, if they get some of those guys who were injured early on, get them back on the field, I think TCU wins this game. I think it's probably a double-digit win, too.
Yeah, I take TCU in this game also. Northwestern, number 13 Northwestern visits Ann Arbor to play number 18 at Michigan, 3:30 on the Big Ten Network. Northwestern 5-0 for the first time since 2012. The guy that I was going to pick as a player to watch would be Justin Jackson. He's been running the ball really well for Northwestern. But the key in this game, I think, is going to be the first team that can score 10 points is going to win this game. This is going to be a defense-dominated game. Northwestern, number 1 in the country in scoring defense. They've given up 7 points a game. Michigan, number 2 in the country in scoring defense, giving up just 7.6 points a game. This is going to come down to the defensive end.
Yeah, it really is. I would be shocked if it's not the first team that scores 7 points wins this
Why?
game.
I was figuring that
This could be a 7-6 final, to be honest with you. This is really Big Ten football. You talk about one of the reasons why I think Jim Harbaugh has had success at Michigan so early on is because he's gone back to the basics. They've really got that defense playing like Big Ten defenses. It all starts up front. They're able to get to the quarterback. They're able to cause havoc within the offense. And I think, in their own offensive things, Jake Reddick, who's come in, has really just, not turned the ball over. I think the first game against Utah, he had 3 interceptions. I think since then he's really been limited on that. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. I like Michigan in this game, but again, I'm talking like a point. I was kidding, but 7-6 could be it. I think this is a good win, for either one of these teams. And this is whoever comes out of this game, I think has the really strong case to be, you look at probably the best contender outside of Ohio State and Michigan State.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Northwestern in this game, and solely on the fact that I like Justin Jackson and what he can do with the ball, because this is going to be a defensive battle, and I think that he at least brings the experience to maybe be able to churn out. You're going to need like 1 or 2 touchdown drives, and you can win this game. So I'm taking Northwestern in a squeaker on the road in a take the under. Is that the gambling term? Unders? Overs?
I don't know if we're supposed to talk about that anymore.
Yes, that's right. Don't take the under. Just know that there's not going to be a lot of points. Don't play a drinking game where you drink after every score, because you guys are going to be painfully sober when you watch this game. California, number 23 in the country, visits number 5 Utah, 10 o'clock Saturday night on ESPN. This is the third time the Utes are hosting game day, so it's a pretty big game out there for them. They actually received first place votes in the AP this past week. You have, as we've mentioned earlier in the show, Devontae Booker averaging 148 all-purpose yards for Utah, and of course Cal quarterback Jared Goff, 15 touchdown passes, over 1,600 yards passing. These are two teams that, if you don't stay up late, you may not know a lot about. But Cal has been playing very good football, explosive football through the air, and obviously we've talked about Utah when we were putting them in as one of the teams in the playoff mix. This is a bigger game than people may realize.
Yeah, it really is. Where's the love for Sonny Dykes? I mean, the Cal coach who comes in here, really no one talks about him when you think about Pac-12 coaches. You think of Rich Rodriguez and, Mike Leach and Steve Sarkisian. But Sonny Dykes is right there. He's got his team 5-0. They're ranked. Jared Goff is making a lot of people comparisons to another great quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, who played at Cal. So, again, this is a game, I think, where we're going to see whether this offense for Cal can put up enough points against the Utah defense that's playing really well. This was a tough pick for me because I think right now Utah's playing the most complete football right now. But I still think that Cal at some point is going to end up in this season being probably one of the better teams coming out of the Pac-12 North.
So who are you picking then?
I'm taking Utah because I think they're playing better. I think the defense is playing good. I think this could be a high-scoring game. I'm not talking like 50, 60 points, but for Pac-12 purposes, it could be maybe in the 30s.
This is the fifth game we've picked. I'm taking the road team for the fifth time. I'm taking Cal in this one because I think that offense is just going to prove to be a lot at Utah. I'm going with Cal in this one and Jared Goff. Now we get to pick the state games, and we're going to start with the civil conflict. Because when UCF and Connecticut meet, you throw out the records. And in this case, they probably both would like to throw out the records. Connecticut and UCF play at 3:45 on ESPNU. The civil conflict joke it's a UConn thing. But they try to make a rivalry out of this. They played twice as American Athletic Conference opponents. They both won at home. UCF, as we said earlier in the show, this might be their chance for a victory this year. It's crazy to say after winning the conference title for 2 years. This could be their only chance for a W, but this could be their only chance for a W.
Yeah, look at this game. I know UCF is favored in this game. I know they're favored by double digits, I think we talked about. So, again, I'm not sure. I think if Justin Holman plays and if he's effective, that's the big if, is the effectiveness. Because, again, broken finger on the hand is tough to come back from. You've been out of the lineup for a while. You haven't had an opportunity really to play in game conditions. It's going to be tougher to do that. I think the over-under is more points or more fans. To be honest with you. This game is not going to draw really well, I don't think. And I think, again, I'm going to take UConn. I think they take home the trophy. I think they are the ones that run around on the field with it after the game.
Yeah, the Civil Conflict Trophy, the heralded, much-wanted Civil Conflict Trophy will stay in stores. It'll head back on the plane. I'm picking UConn. But sorry, UCF fans. I
will say this, and this is not. But I think at some point, I think UCF will get a win. They'll win a game that I think people don't expect them to win because I think this team has young talent. They just haven't been able to opportunity to gel. I think the injuries have really been bad as well. I think at some point there's going to be a game that they're going to, whether that's the USF game or whether that's another game.
Scout team in practice.
I think at some point they're going to get a win. I think those are the teams that you got to worry about because again, when you start thinking to yourselves, we got nothing to lose, that's when things kind of, that's when teams really kind of start to gel and play better.
And UCF, I kid because I love. It's all from the heart. Miami visits FSU, number 12 Florida State, at home on Saturday night, 8 p.m. national broadcast game on ABC. FSU has won 5 in a row in the series. They've won 8 of 10. They're the only team in the country that hasn't committed an offensive turnover, and Miami comes in one of the best teams in the country in turnover margin. They're +9 in turnover margin. That's good for number 2 in the country. It's one of the positive signs for Miami heading into this one. This game has lost a little luster from years past, but it's still a big game. It's still a rivalry game. Snoop Minnis having fun today on social media with it, showing that it still matters to the guys that have played in this game. Is Miami good enough to come in and rekindle some of those great games and give Florida State a chance, or give Florida State a challenge in this one?
Well, I think they will. I think one of the things that I'm looking at this game is I think Miami's one of the better teams with the deep ball. I think they do a great job of getting the ball down the field, taking advantage of those situations. Brad Kaya can throw the ball, get him downfield, and kind of push the defense. I don't think Florida State's played anyone like that yet. I think maybe Wake tried to a little bit last week. Weather conditions weren't well. I think it'll be interesting, but we all know that Florida State's got one of the better secondaries as well. Jalen Ramsey out there obviously doing his good job. I want to see Florida State flip it. I want to see them do that. I want to see them throw the ball downfield. I think the biggest issue is if Dalvin Cook isn't playing, is going to be if the offense falls on Everett Golson's shoulders, can he carry them? Can he do the things that need to be done to kind of keep the offense moving? I got Florida State winning this game by a field goal.
Wide middle, right?
Wide middle.
Right down the middle. I'm picking Florida State in this one, but this was a tough one for me to pick. I think it's going to be closer than people think. I think everybody's looking at Miami and struggles, and they see the banners flying over, the half-empty stadium in Miami, and they think that things are really bad in Miami. I don't think they're as bad as that, and it's a rivalry game. I think Miami keeps this game close, but in the end, Florida State gets the win, barely. I'm gonna say Miami misses a field goal at the end, wide right, and that's how Florida State wins this game. Last game we're going to pick, number 11, Florida heads to Missouri to play at 7:30 on Saturday night on SEC Network. Tigers looking for their third straight win over the Gators. They will have freshman quarterback Drew Lock starting in place of Matty Mock, who's suspended indefinitely at this point. So this is Lock's team now. He threw for 2 touchdowns in their win over South Carolina last weekend. Missouri, they bring it on the defense. They're going to have the pressure on the D-line. They're known for sacks. They lead the SEC in pass defense. This is going to be a test for Will Grier coming in off that win over Ole Miss last weekend. This will be the test. It's the sandwich game. It's between Ole Miss and LSU. Everybody's already talking about the LSU game like it's the biggest game of the season. Jim McElwain will be working to keep the players from looking ahead too far. I have an idea where I might go on this because I have been drinking the Gatorade, but Florida visits Missouri. This isn't as cut and dried as people may think.
No, it really isn't. I mean, I think now we get to see, we talk about what makes a good coach, and we talk about the X's and the O's and all that stuff. But I got to tell you right now, I think for me, what makes a good coach is how does a coach handle a success? Jim McElwain's got his players. He's hearing everyone. He knows the players are hearing the buzz. He knows they're being talked about as a possible, SEC East champion. He knows there's a lot of good love and a lot of good vibes being sent Florida's way right now. So I think when you think about that along the lines, I think that's when a coach needs to come in and ground his players. Say, listen, we haven't done anything yet. We've won a big game. That's fine. Now we're going to go on the road and we're going to play an opponent that we're supposed to beat. But again, a road game. So I think, McElwain's got to do a good job of doing that. He mentioned that in Monday's press conference that, again, how do you keep these kids grounded? How do you do whatever you got to do? So to me, I think that's going to be the biggest issue. I think Florida wins this game. I'm going to pick Florida in this game, but I'm picking it to be a very close game because I really feel like that coming off that big win, there's always going to be a little bit of emotional letdown. I think they'll struggle early on as well. I think Will Grier, he might have issues, but again, I like this defense. I think this defense is playing some of the best defense we've seen in the country right now. Florida wins, but it's going to be really close.
Now you went on the bandwagon?
I don't want to.
Last week, who was the person that picked Florida to beat Ole Miss? And everybody made. If we had a collection of faces that this person made when I was picking Florida last week, when I told Tim Tebow, this drink's for you, it was shameful how little you thought of my pick. So I gave it some thought. I'm staying on the Gator bandwagon. Gators go into Missouri. This is Gators. It's all about the Gators.
Wait, did you keep the receipt so you can return this at the end of the week?
I got it on clearance when they were 4 at 8. It was easy to get Gator shirts 2 years ago. I'm taking the Gators over Missouri.
Wait, does that say Gorders? Gorders, not Gators? Is that you sure that's an official, authentic shirt? So
I'm on a newspaper budget here. We don't have craft services. I don't have a wardrobe budget. But in all seriousness, you're looking at a freshman quarterback starting for Missouri in Drew Lock. And if there's one thing that Florida does well is play well against quarterbacks. They have 5 straight games, at least 3 sacks in a game. They're going to put the pressure on Missouri. I don't think they're going to look ahead because I don't think this team – I don't think they're there enough to be looking ahead. I think they're still in the moment. They're a young, developing team. Jim McElwain will keep them on point. Florida goes into Missouri, knocks them off, and sets up that big a game against LSU, and then I'm going to have to figure out who I'm going to pick in that game. I don't know who it'll be.
Well, you've been drinking Gatorade. You've got a T-shirt on. What are you going to do next? Dye your hair?
I'm going to call up Tim Tebow and take some advice from him.
There you go.
So there we have it. I've picked the Gators again and made my family proud. Next week, we'll figure out if I'm gloating some more, but you picked Florida, so it's not as big a gloat on college football now. For Matt Murschel, I'm Brant Parsons. Watch us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. right here at OrlandoSentinel.com.